welcome back to Cast Me to Hell with me, Seb.
And with me, Robbie.
And this week we are straight from the cinema.
We are straight from the cinema.
But we're about a week late on the film. With the game adaptation of Until Dawn.
Yes. We were both big fans of the game Until Dawn. I remember us playing it pretty consistently when it first came out.
I think I think even possibly in our first ever episode, we mentioned that this was one of our horror experiences that we kind of loved. I think we've done some video game related stuff in the past. We've mentioned our love of the fact. I think like once or was it even twice we actually played through parts of this game. I think
so.
We definitely did one night where we did the entire game, the whole game, with people sat around taking turns.
We all picked a character. That was awesome. Man.
One of my favorite nights again to do that as like a group is like,
it was so good.
It's one of my favorite gaming experiences of all time.
Oh, and it was awesome.
And it's the interesting thing about it, because the idea that you get to play for a game that is. And this is one of those immersive games that is so popular because it had like a horror storyline where you could actually follow along with it. But it was also, it had a lot of characters, quite a lot of depth at times to some of the story. You felt like you could be really immersed into it. And you obviously had a role in that as well. You know, you were pretty shit. If it was a game where technically that just makes it a film.
Yeah,
so
it was just a film.
But it felt cinematic. You know, it had a lot of actors in it: Rami Malek and Hayden Panettiere, and a whole bunch of recognizable faces at the time, kind of thing. So there's a reason it was a huge hit. You know, it kind of build up, but has got bigger and bigger over time as well. Like more and more people have found it and stuff like that. That's why. There's all of... Is it Dark Pictures? Is that what it is?
Yeah, it kind of has its own thing. And then there was The Quarry, which I think you
played.
I haven't played it yet.
Yeah, The Quarry was quite good. It wasn't Until Dawn level. It didn't have quite the depth of character and kind of thing that the game Until Dawn had. And then we've got the question that ever comes with any video game adaptation. Is the problem is, how do you make a video game adaptation when, let's be honest, video games more and more are getting more and more like cinematic and bigger in scope all the time. They've got you know some games where you just go, I mean, you could literally shot for shot remake this into a film, yes, and that'll be it. But do you want it to be shot for shot remade into a film? I guess is a lot of people's question is like, why not just play it if you can just want to go and see it play out? You know what I mean?
And that's what I kind of going into this film. I wasn't sure what to expect. I think one of the things that I loved about Until Dawn, playing it for the first time, and I remember, and obviously we're going to be talking about spoilers for the film and the game. So if you haven't watched it, go watch it, come back and have a listen. And if you haven't played it, then play it and come back and have a listen. But the way in which it kind of kept...
I was expecting your cheap plug to be...
my cheap plug is obviously, before you go, hit that subscribe button and then come back, because we party till the break of dawn at Cast Me to Hell, and leave us a lovely review, of course. But make sure you hit that subscribe button and then come back. But the thing that really stuck with me was just when you were kind of thinking you know where it's going, you get a twist. So there were kind of three main twists within Until Dawn that I remember. And I was going into this and I was thinking, well, how are they... I mean, I wasn't sure whether it was going to be a straight adaptation of it. I wasn't sure whether it was going to follow pretty much the same storyline. I wasn't really sure. And what we got, I did enjoy, but I didn't... It did have kind of some problems. It was a very middling film. I started off and I was like, okay, it's just starting to get real hot here in the UK. And I was like, this is the film that we need right now. We need this kind of like fun, doesn't kind of take itself too seriously.
Yeah. Bit more throwaway.
Just to kick off the summer. And I was thinking, oh man, they could do these set in the 90s and the 80s and constant ones. But as the film went on, I don't know, I found there were some issues.
I mean, so the main thing here is that, and the main thing that I think I've seen out there about this film is, that they made Until Dawn, they put the title on the film, but the film itself, it does not exactly feel like Until Dawn. Now, I think there's some truth to that. And there is also elements where it's like, if you take this as being a different kind of, it's still Until Dawn, but as the film kind of tries to establish, it's in its own kind of story. So it's almost like another story within the Until Dawn universe, with our, with Peter Stormane's kind of main kind of character. It very much has several things about the film that make it clear that it's trying to say, like, actually, we didn't want to just remake that other, version. So we're trying to do something that's in the world of it, but it's actually its own thing.
Well, you have to, because you could, if you're trying to make an Until Dawn film, you just have to make a straight adaptation. But you can't really do that because the premise of Until Dawn is, the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
And it's the reason why we played it twice. I must have played it 5-6 times myself because it's the branching storylines and what's going to happen if I do this next time. And unless you're going to make a new film every time I rewatch it, it's not going to happen.
But I think one thing that this film obviously tries to do, which I think is both something that was very clever, and I think something that could have allowed them to actually get into that kind of, not butterfly effect, but actually give them a device that kind of gives you kind of some of a similar idea, playing out differently but still following it, is this that they keep having to repeat in the same way, but not in a Groundhog Day kind of way, obviously, because each time they're getting technically a new threat or an added threat that's coming along.
Yeah.
So that's and this is what I saw in the trailer, which made me think, you know what, that's, as a lot of people said, that doesn't sound like Until Dawn, but it does sound fun. It does sound like a cool idea, and the interesting thing with that is that's, for me, is partially something that was clever, but also somewhat of the downfall. And I'll get to the downfall part later. But sticking on the that butterfly effect, I did think if it had played out the original kind of adapted version of the original story, I think that repeating the same day kind of Groundhog effect kind of thing could have replaced the idea of the butterfly effect, because they make a mistake but they build those relationships. One thing about the game that I really love is the fact that a lot of the characters have to build relationships, and then they have to make the choice as to whether actually, fuck that guy, I'm out of here, or actually I'm that. And you could play that out really nicely with this effect. It's like, well, it didn't work out for me so well when I went fuck that guy yesterday, so I'm now going to have to relive this day. Okay, this time actually I'm going to stick with these guys and we're going to see. And having that kind of play out until actually they've managed to find the way for everyone to get out this time, unlike the actual game, yes, but it still allows for that nice kind of, we're repeating patterns, we're having to go through things, we can still change it, so it doesn't have to be exactly the same, so it doesn't have to be Groundhog. But I quite liked the idea of these, like, motions are changing, but little things are changing each time. What I think was the downfall is the fact that although the idea of having all these different creatures and all these different ways and different horror films mashed together is a cool idea, the problem is it ends up feeling rather bland versions of each of them after a while. It's
tricky because they never feel as if they get as fully fleshed out as they kind of could do. So I'm just kind of, we're told that they go through this kind of repeatedly and they go through these different nights, and I think the ones that spring to mind are probably like 4 that we see. So you see obviously the kind of the main slasher, which is based on kind of Rami Malek's the kind of like clownish character he makes in Until Dawn,
which is kind of one of the main twists of the original game, isn't it? That he ends up being like, he's brought them all there because he's getting revenge,
And then you've got the Wendigo, which I was wondering whether they were going to bring that in, because I remember the first time I played Until Dawn, I was like, what the fuck is that? And it made me cack my pants, and it was a great twist.
The Wendigos are so good. I feel like they had to have the Wendigo, because the Wendigo is the main kind of thing of... most people remember the Indigo. They might not remember that, Rami Malek's Josh was not actually the thing. They might not remember a lot of how any other deaths happened, but they definitely remember being chased. I remember playing one bit when the Wendigo flew like the forest. I mean... so Rip Dog is one of the reasons. That's a down on this thing. There is no dog in order for me to go Rip Dog. And Rip Dog is an absolute. I mean, technically, only for our group, the fact that we all said Rip Dog was our little catchphrase when we lost that dog for the rest of the game. After Dog died, it was Rip Dog. But for me, having no dog to go Rip Dog on is just like, well, you've just ruined my Until Dawn experience.
Yeah, I was wondering if we were going to get Rip Dog, but apparently not.
We've got the explosion from the water. You know, that was probably the most fun. The weakest one that pops to mind, if I like playing with the early ones we get, because then it's kind of fast forwarded through somewhat.
Yeah.
The witch one is the worst one. Was the least interesting to me.
And this is where I played Until Dawn. Kind of, I corroded it quite a lot. And then I brought Man of Medan, which was the second one, set on this kind of boat. And I got about halfway through, but I stopped playing. It was during COVID and I just couldn't lock in with it. And then I didn't get around to Little Hope, which I believe is the kind of like folklore one.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of one set inside of like a pyramid or some like Iranian tombs or Egyptian tomb around some like army guys, which was supposed to be really good, House of Blood or something. So I didn't play those ones, so I wasn't sure whether this kind of witch character was an ode or
and then I think the quarry is not technically part of
it's not part of the
because it was made by but then got taken over by something else or whatever it is.
So I wasn't sure whether like.
And none of them lived up to Until Dawn's kind of original potential. I
thought was a sleeper hit because I got it because I love horror, and then I said to my colleague like, I'm playing this game, and he was like, it sounds decent. And there was a free demo I think that did like a bit of the opening where you play as Hayden Panettiere and you're hiding, and he played that and then he just brought it instantly. But I kind of feel like the Wendigos didn't have that emotional kind of like hook to them where it's the sisters. It just felt like a lot of the times I got to the point where I was like, so like what is like why like Peter Stormare, why are you doing this? And just going
the Peter Stormare bit didn't like that bit didn't oddly just I liked him
in the gas station I was like, that's if this is all we see of him. I like that as a little nod.
But then it had to replicate the whole that he was actually the
psychologist.
He was the psychologist who also helped with the Josh thing. But in here they turn him into the overall big bad basically. Yeah. Which is not what he really is. He's an omnipresent kind of almost person in some weird ways in the game. Yeah. He's kind of beyond that. He's not like the main target enemy at the end that they're like, we've got to defeat this guy to be that. That was an unsatisfying way to use him, to be honest, to make him into this big, like, including the as we mentioned about the blowing up of the blood. They drink water and the bits start exploding on them basically, and that's what's used to off him in a very obvious and like that wouldn't catch you out. And why would he not be aware of it in the office and blow it? And
it felt very convenient, didn't it? Just being like,
And I think this is my major gripe overall is the fact that it's not that this is not a fun kind of a movie, but it's the fact that I think in the original game was complex. Yeah, it had a lot of twists. It had a lot of character dynamics that needed to go. And yes, there are similarities, such as we start with a missing character. Technically, we open in the original Until Dawn game, and you have these two characters that then get taken and they go missing, and then you've got this character that returns, not so much to look for them, but you're like, that's the brother, and they died here ages ago, and you're all like kind of wondering why, So the fact that in the film we kind of have this, opening of like the girl, we get the sister that gets kind of dragged back down into the thing, and we find out that's who they're looking for. All feels a little bit less Until Dawn and a bit more like Friday the 13th remake to me than it does like
a little bit,
a bit more like that. But it's more the fact that one, we never really build enough emotional complexity to that relationship with the sister, but we get one scene later in the film that's like she was going away, and it doesn't really make you warm towards the sister, and doesn't really make you feel like there's much of a huge relationship there for you to really care that much. So when you go to the Wendigo thing and you have her being that, unlike in the game when it's like these friends that they lost and their other friends are changing as well, and you've played through these games for this long, it's hard to build that kind of same emotional relevance to them, the changing of them, as well as the fact that they kind of alter the Wendigo to match the style of the film instead of exactly what it is in the game.
And I feel like the Wendigo is a very interesting kind of bit of folklore itself, and from my understanding, it doesn't just have to be like cannibalism. I know one of our campfire stories we briefly did a little Wendigo story, but it's kind of that like corruption of the soul and that sort of thing, and greed, and it was a bit weird that it was just like Peter Stormare is like keeping them in this time loop, and the more afraid and the longer they're in it, they become.
The town
Wendigos.
was destroyed, so now he's keeping the people that are still around from the town who have emotional problems, and he's decided the best way is that they seem to be stuck in this time loop, so he's going to watch them and keep them in a room until they kill them, and kill others around them, and turn into a Wendigo.
So it made no sense in terms of like the Until Dawn, but also almost the establishment of the folklore. Yeah. And I completely get if you go, well, he doesn't have to be gobbling people up, and you want to instead just focus on like corruption and doing that to a person, but just being like, oh yeah, he was scared, so he just turned. And I don't know, it kind of felt a bit weird. There was some, like, especially in the later part, there were some set pieces that I thought I could see where they're kind of nodding their head to Until Dawn. The bit where they're kind of being chased through the underground, like, sanatorium, whatever. I thought that was good. I remember doing that with Mike in the game. And the first time I was doing it, I was fucking cacking my pants, and it was incredible. And it was quite good. And then there was some, there was some
of those pieces were like, I like the look of what they're caught inside of.
Yeah.
The whole rain around it, this whole idea that this is like this set place, and I like the way that when the days changes, you can see little touches that have changed around them. There were little touches in this film that I was like when
I like the use of silence just to cut in. Yeah. Like I feel like it at times it did kind of rely a little bit heavy on jump scares, but some of them got me. Unsuspectingly, some of them got me, and I kind of feel like the use of silence was really good at certain moments, particularly in that kind of like first act, maybe.
Yeah. I think, so I was going to mention about the fact that when these characters obviously are killed because they die again and again and again, which we, I guess we haven't completely mentioned fully, that obviously they are reliving this day after day, they keep dying, and basically, which again, it's a cool idea almost to show kind of video game ideas almost, because the idea that you can die and respawn and you're back, and you just like a video game, technically you can only get through this once you actually survive, and this logic here could work really well if you're going to adapt certain other video games. It could be a really cool idea. And in this one, the touches such as when the characters, when the kind of boyfriend of our main character, early in the film, the first deaths that they get, he gets stabbed through the eye. When he wakes up, he has a huge bruised eye.
Yeah,
they have bruises where they've been one of the girls has her face bashed in, so her face is covered in bruises. Those are cool little touches. Although I thought, oh, that's cool, and it's going to build up, and they're going to keep building it so they look rougher and rougher and rougher. I was a bit disappointed when actually some of them started disappearing, and that makeup went away, except for the one psychic girl who just was out of all of them was the one that just looked like she was completely drained, whereas the rest of them were like, you guys look like you're alright. Actually, you guys look like you're getting back to your nice full skin. Whereas she looks like she's absolutely being drained out. So I liked those kind of little touches that we had in the kind of. There's nothing wrong with the look of the film and the way that they've laid them out. There's no denying that it still feels obviously smaller scale than what we kind of previously had. Even though it was set in a house last time, obviously it was more like a mansion-esque kind of Alps kind of thing.
And you had sprawling mountainsides, and
you've
mines,
and you've got forests, and you go so. And again, we've got that link, with the mine stuff because they talk about the destruction of a whole town from the mine thing. Whereas in the first game, you've got the mine disaster that happened as well, which links to the whole Wendigo thing and kind of links it all together. So he's taken bits of the ideas of what worked in the original Until Dawn and he's brought them together, but he wanted to do his own kind of version, using the whole hourglass kind of thing, I think the idea is cool, but it is one of those things where I think this would have been a better film if it had actually still focused mainly on the Wendigo. And just stuck to one kind of thing, because I can't really say that when people exploding for me was probably the standout of the things that was killing them. When you've got creatures and monsters, there's one cool bit where they drive out into the rain and you see this huge creature in the night kind of thing, which I thought was quite cool, but none of them had much effect. They all felt like lackluster, kind of what you'd expect. It reminded me a bit of like the Fear Street, the second the second part, when they had all the different killers appear. And if you go back to the original like Fear Street one, they had all the different killers start to appear in one thing. And but the difference with that one, you were more. I felt even with that film, you were more staked into the characters than you were here. And part of the problem with this is the fact that I just don't think. Unlike the game where we had lots of complex kind of like talking, which I don't think would have been hard to achieve here, the characters just feel so bland in comparison to like what we had with the game. The most interesting part is the fact that each time they make choices, and they try to add a little bit of that in here. They tried to have some of them be like, no, we need to survive. It doesn't matter if they don't survive. And you had little moments, but there just wasn't enough of it. In the original game, you have like. You've got relationships that you start to get drawn into, and you've got people that are making choices that it's like, oh, now you should probably go away from that choice because that's not working for you. And a lot of that dynamic, I feel, is not here at all, which makes it just feel like a bland slasher horror, whatever you got kind of thing.
Yeah, and then I feel like to give the film one kind of good credit is I thought the gore was really well done.
Yeah.
When we do see the people getting killed for the first time, a lot of the shots are quite good. It doesn't necessarily linger too long. It's not overly kind of gratuitous in how it kills them, but it's enough that you're like, oh fucking hell, that'd be bargain.
Yeah.
And then we get you get the explosion, which is good, which is quite fun. But yeah, it kind of feels like maybe they should have focused more on this kind of slasher and the Wendigos, because it just feels like, as fun as the exploding was, it feels like that was just set up so that they could do that at the end. Like everything's apparently linked to her fears and they say that she's the engine which is driving it, so they're all of them mean something. So what is she got rabies? So she's scared of water? Like, it doesn't make sense.
I mean, I think this is why it's kind of undermining. So the idea of having multiple different killers and stuff is a cool idea on paper, but just doesn't really work so much when you're actually putting it into action.
Yeah.
Whereas one thing is, as I said, the Wendigos, but also to go back to the original Until Dawn game, the Wendigos is not the main thing that's driving the story. This is the problem. The focus on the things that are killing them being such a focus in the story takes away from the ideas. Whereas if, like I said at the beginning, if the focus had been on the mystery, a mystery that they had to solve, and each time they were surviving, they were getting a bit more of the mystery, but they also need to try and survive, all survive together, so they're trying to keep everyone surviving. I felt that would have been more true to the heart of Until Dawn, when there is a lingering mystery of why they've been brought here, why this is happening to them, and there's not just Wendigos as the killer. Yes, there is the masked killer, as well.
Yeah.
And they've got other things where they keep finding clues and stuff like that, but there's not really any exploration to this. They find a new place, and then very quickly we're kind of, one of them's dragged off, one of them's
Yeah.
There's not a lot of mix, and there's not a lot of chance to kind of mix it up either. You've got in Until Dawn, for instance, again, you don't really have a main like character. You've got characters you flip around with.
You play all of them.
Yeah, and but that's the thing. Like, where was the chance here to be like? We kept going back to the most obvious thing of having our main character, the girl who was looking for a sister, and we kept having her be the one that was making it to the last of all of them and stuff like that. And it's like, you've got a really good chance here to give us more perspective of each character by going, well, yeah, she survived the first one because she was the main one, but this time actually she's off straight away, and actually this time we're going to follow the other girl. But instead it was literally, right, dude we know least, the dude who they don't even know that well, he's the girl. Then it was the girlfriend, then it was the Asian girl, then it was the boyfriend, and then it was her. And that played out pretty much every time that they died, the same order. And I was just, that was one thing that kept niggling on. I was like, come on, like, kill her, and let us have one of the other guys, like, we're playing different characters. Yeah. That's a nice way, again, to mix it up.
And then it could have also linked in with, like, this guy, he finds something.
Yeah.
But then he ends up dying, so next time
she's got that information, and you feel like you're playing a game with different characters a little bit more, like the actual game. And again, if we had a more overarching mystery that wasn't just the kind of, the missing sister thing just felt very lacking of any real...
Yeah, and it kind of was like, it got to a point, they're looking for the sister, which I think it's an acceptable and it's a fine story. And then they get told that she went to this estate or this like area. They get there, they find like her name in the logbook, they find her picture on the missing poster, and we get these bits where like you see her off in that storm, which is quite cool, and then her being revealed as being a Wendigo I thought was really good. Yeah. But it's almost like you find out she's a Wendigo, and her sister freaks out a little bit, and then it's just like, I'm sorry, but I'm getting out of here.
Yeah, you're gone now, so this is over now, kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's kind of
we have a link back scene again, which just feels you've got this flashback scene to her and her sister that comes at a really odd time. When it feels like it would have made a lot more sense to be like, because there's an opening scene where she's kind of asleep in the back of the car. Feels like you could have shot that scene, put that in there, then she wakes up in the car, and that seems better, like a better editing strategy. You've already introduced us to the thing, and it feels like the only reason they do that is because a second later, when she kills her sister by putting her through a spike, she basically refers back to that by saying, I need to get out of this shithole, which is basically what her sister told her in that scene you saw about 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, it was
her sister was like, I need to get out of here, I need to get to the city and get a job, and I need to get out of this wasteland, and then she basically says the same line back to her, and it's like, feels like the only reason we had that flashback, which is out of place completely, is just so that we remember why you've just said that line.
Yeah, it was so weird. It felt, I remember when we were watching it was like a really bright scene that just came out of nowhere, and I was like, what the fuck? And then they chuck in like a jump scare on it.
Yeah.
And it just felt like it was just like misedited.
I did also feel that with the sister, like when we first see her in the forest, it's kind of like a shock, and it kind of works kind of well, with them being chased by her, because it's all quite quick. Yeah. When we get a full look at her face, I just didn't like that. It looked like someone was just been really like caked up in makeup. Yeah. Like, it looked a bit like, from a distance, it kind of just looked like someone in this nice flowery dress with a really overdone face that just happens to have this huge mouth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, unlike some of the other Wendigos, which are a little bit better. I mean, I like the fact that they're practical.
Oh, the practical's good, but
they're not really as extended though. Like the arms and the legs are more like proper, like kind of longer in the game.
They're more like animal-like.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, Like
there's one cool scene when he's on like the stair. There's one of them on like the stairs, and she's hiding behind it, which is kind of like our closest, like best look at one of the more fully like bold kind of Wendigo. And from that perspective, it looks really cool. I think it was more when they stood up like normal humans. It kind of just looked a bit more like you kind of just now look like a human with the weird face, and the rest of it isn't Wendigo enough for me. I wanted more like extended arms and legs, like really
more
like
feral. Almost.
Yeah,
because I feel like the movement's relatively a bit humanoid as well. It reminds. They almost look like when this has got to be a bit of an odd reference, but in RoboCop when.
Yeah,
the guy gets melted by acid.
Yeah,
and he's all like that. It looked kind of a bit like that. Like I didn't think that they looked particularly great. Like at no point. I respect that it's practical.
Yeah.
But they almost looked like the Toxic Avenger or something like melted, as opposed to something like feral. Like so the couple of Wendigos that I've seen in media, I guess you've got something like Antlers where they do lean into the more, I guess you'd call it like typical understanding of it, which is like the antlers and the very kind of like deer, like foresty creature. Yeah. But then in Until Dawn, the thing that I liked about that is they were just like these skinny creatures who were like constantly starved because they could never satisfy their hunger, and I feel like they should have been more of this like animalistic, like feral, like creatures.
I think part of that is affected by the fact we just don't get that much of them. We get a few scenes. The parts, to be fair, that do work really well is like when it's counting down towards the end of the film.
Yeah.
When they're getting chased through the mine kind of thing, and there's this kind of thing between her trying to survive, the friends trying to survive. They're all trying to get away from them. They're trying to get out. When they're a bit more kind of in the shadows and being chased, that suddenly ramped up the tension for me. I was like, okay, this is actually quite a like cool kind of scene. I think it worked quite nicely, that kind of ending where you've got them kind of rushing out to that kind of that surviving point. I think it is somewhat refreshing to get to the end of a horror film and be like, actually everyone survived.
Yeah,
and they did actually make it Until Dawn, which is a nice like achievement, and it feels a bit more game like to be like, yes, I won by doing it. I mean, I didn't, because in Until Dawn, some of them I just didn't want to survive. So I'm like, you ain't making this the end.
I'm leaving you.
And then I've just made the choice because I think that will kill you, and then it'll accidentally kill the person I don't want to die, and I will be devastated because
I shot one of them in the head. I did this thing. I think it was Emily, where I really liked her character. I thought she was great. And I did like a really intense escape away from a Wendigo. She got scratched.
Yeah.
And then Mike has a gun, and it was so intense, and I was like, she's got to turn, fuck me. And I killed her, and I was like, fuck, she was like my favourite character. And then like 3 or 4 like chapters later, or not even that long maybe, they're like, oh yeah, you can't become a Wendigo by being scratched or bitten. And I was like, fuck.
What did I do?
Shot in the head, yeah. And I was like, oh, fuck's sake,
But that's what I mean. Like this is just why I do wish, and I think this is part. If it had just been the Wendigos and a mystery kind of thing, I think a lot more people who played Until Dawn and saw the trailer and stuff, a lot more people would have been like, yeah, I mean, I can see how they're trying with Until Dawn. It's never going to be exactly the same. You can't replicate that in the same way. Unless you're going to do some stupid ass Netflix
choose your adventure
kind of thing. Unless you're going to do that with it, then which may or may not be good. I don't know, but unless you're going to do that with it, which also again I'd say, what's the point? Because just play the game. You know what I mean? Instead, unless you're going to do that with it, then it had to be a bit different. But I think the ideas are definitely there to make it work. It just sadly some of the ideas that have gone into it. But I also just think the general structure of the screenplay. It's just not thought enough about like how to flesh out these characters to make them feel more than your throwaway horror kind of characters instead of being in-depth ones.
And I kind of feel like tonally it was it started off, and I kind of felt like it was going more for a bit of like a lighter atmosphere maybe.
Yeah.
Which is why I was quite like, oh, this is kind of what we need at the moment. and this is going to kick off summer for us. And then I feel like if you want to do like time loops, and if you're going to do stuff like this, where you're pretty much removing the stakes of death, removing some of probably the biggest stake you can, you need to, or I feel like you need to lean into the tongue-in-cheek, or you need to lean into some of the comedy, which is why I think Happy Death Day works so well.
Yeah.
And we've spoken about some of that stuff before. Whereas this one, it almost felt like once they got kind of to the main house and things started to kick off, there were some attempts at humour.
Yeah.
And them exploding the first time was quite funny. But I feel like tonally they were like, we're trying to tell like a bit of a serious story,
Yeah.
But I feel like when people can just die and then you can start again, it's kind of gets
because they tried to bring the whole Wendigo thing in, the idea that the more and more it goes on, that they'll actually become a Wendigo. So
yeah.
So there's the stakes to that, and to be fair, that also links to the and just as you're starting to feel that idea of the stakes of the Wendigo and the idea of that thing, and you have like one of the boyfriend character who's like, oh, what's on my back, and they're all like, not again, attempt at a humour kind of a bit to be like, no, nothing, you're fine, even though he's got like literal spines starting to grow out of his back. But the weird thing with that is that they get to that point, and you're sat there thinking, right, so we've done a couple of the nights so far. We've only seen like 3-4, at this point, 3 different scenarios, 4 different scenarios, and then that's the reveal that actually, no, it's already been like 13.
Yeah.
Which to me just felt suddenly like, I don't know why, but I just felt suddenly properly like shortchanged, because it felt like there was nothing to indicate that we'd moved forward, that we'd change. And I understand the idea that they're like, they add in a line of dialogue to be like, I can't remember any of this kind of thing. And I was just like, but in the first death, you did remember what happened before.
Yeah, very vaguely.
So I guess the more it's going on, the more you're forgetting it, which, okay, fine kind of thing.
Maybe they're losing their humanity, I guess you could argue.
Yeah, and then obviously I was like, you could at least do a montage, which then they do a montage by going onto the phone and like showing us like scenes of what happened, some of which are pretty cool. You've got the one I've seen on a lot of the trailers with the like spider creature that's coming out of her cheek, which again, like, that's gross and horrific kind of thing. And there's one cool one where it's like this creature that's coming towards them, and then they realise actually how large it is because it's kind of tall and bending down. Cool. That kind of odd Slender Man-y kind of like thing. But again, it just feels like we're suddenly just passing through it, because it's like, oh yeah, we've done a couple of these, but we need to get to the end now.
Yeah,
we just need to get up. But it didn't feel so much like, oh, we're nicely now transitioning into the final act. It felt more like, yeah, we're kind of run out of steam here. Let's just get on to the reveal that actually, this guy that we're not really sure why he's tinkering with anything is actually being controlling, and actually forcing us.
Now, what does he get from it?
I don't know. It feels completely, especially when they establish the idea that it's linked into him being the same one that's in the the original Until Dawn, basically, that he is this same character. This is basically a sequel then to Until Dawn,
or prequel,
but prequel at the same time. Yeah, so so we get the idea. Although obviously we don't get a scene of him definitely being alive, but we get to see the screens and we get to see them showing up to the. Which almost implies the director made this film with the intention that when I get to make my sequel, I'll make the proper Until Dawn. But this time, I'm just going to make you a prequel that's not nearly as good, and people won't want to see it. And people don't never get to make the proper one, and now they probably never will remake it into the actual game because because it looked like he'd filmed an actual scene. It wasn't the video game. He'd filmed an actual scene of a car pulling up to the kind of the lodge at the end there,
and you see like a psychological assessment of Rami Malek's character Josh, and I was just thinking, like, there's a difficult challenge when you're creating something within horror, and it's like, how much do you reveal? Because I think people naturally want to know. People want to know what they're up against. People want to know all of this stuff, and you as an audience, kind of slightly detached from that, you want to have reasons for things in your films. So it's a really difficult, and it's a real commitment to just be like, why is any of this happening? Well, does it even matter? Like, if you were in this situation, you're not going to be like, tell me your Bond villain speech way of explaining your motivation. And I feel like sometimes they need to have the balls to lead into that and to lead into the unknown. And if it was literally just like, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you just need to survive until dawn, and you need to figure out how you're doing this, I feel like I would be like, okay, there's not much of a story there, but you could have told a good story. Whereas when it's like, Peter Stormare is now watching them, and he's like, oh, it's all based on your fear, this is what this represents, this is what this represents. Once you start trying to explain it, you're digging yourself a hole, because you're like, so why did he come here, and then what?
But that's what I mean, because in the original game, he's such, as I said, omnipresent, kind of unusual. You never quite totally know what he was outside of being the psychiatrist to Rami Malek's Josh. Yeah. But you're also like, you've got ideas that he's like not a good guy, and that there might, but it's never like fully like, here you go, it's definitely 100% this is what I am.
He's some kind of like,
I brought them here, I sent the Wendigos,
omniscient narrator almost.
That's what I mean. And obviously we have, what then feels like a somewhat underwhelming, the idea that the almost like, is this meant to be the creation of the Wendigos then, if we're calling this a prequel? It's not, it's just disappointing if so. It's just weird to go with that idea and not want to kind of, but because the one thing about the original game is that simplicity of the idea that a lot of people, when you first start playing, you think that this is we've got a classic slasher, we've got something that happened a long time ago, and now you've got a group of friends who are coming up to this ski lodge, and we're thinking it's a kind of a slasher game. Yeah. And this is the most basic setup for any slasher film. This has been done a million times, and you're thinking that, and playing into that idea, but that's part of the fun, is the fact that, it is that basic setup for an idea, but then that starts weirdly unraveling into things you didn't expect it to go. And that's just where this film just never really turned into this, like, that's not where I expect. This is a film that just seems to introduce ideas and then never really kind of fully tries to pay them off, just kind of goes, let's just make him the bad guy, or one of them's got psychic abilities or some kind of way to reach the dead, but we're only going to mildly tap at the idea throughout the film. And it's not really going to come to anything, and most of the time you're just going to be sat there thinking, why are we going on and on about this when nothing seems to really be doing apart from one supernatural scene where they play into it as part of the deaths, basically. But I kept like, with that character, with the character, I just kept being like, this seems so that you're trying to tap it so lightly that there's no point in us constantly coming back to this idea that she can feel, where is he? Points to the desk. There's a map inside the desk. My god.
Oh wow, there's a map inside a desk.
The whole film, you're with the rest of them being like, I don't think you've got anything. I just think you're just playing into this. I
don't think you're psychic.
There's a reason you're getting beaten up the most here, because you're acting a bit like weird. This is just an odd way to approach it.
It wasn't really very fleshed out, was it?
I mean, So, I mean, it does. It sounds like we're completely shitting on it. I mean, it's weird because it's not that it's not a fun. It's an enjoyable experience. Like in terms of like just switch off your brain and just like enjoy it as that. I mean, it can definitely be questioned as to whether you would feel that this is Until Dawn, as in if we're looking back to the original game. We've already mentioned that it has a lot of there's a lot of links in there.
Definitely.
And it almost feels like it's trying to be connected to the world that it's in. But it is, questionable in terms of like, if you compare the two in quality, then there's not a match.
No, it's
in a lot of aspects. Even the original Until Dawn, I can't say that like the dialogue in the original Until Dawn was amazing at times. It was quite basic at times. Sometimes it could feel very slasher-esque, which sometimes was the point. And sometimes, it felt a little bit hammy and cheesy at points. Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's not like it was an absolute perfect. If you remade that exactly into a film, exactly as the script was, it probably wouldn't feel nearly as good as it worked when you're playing it in the game.
Of course.
But the thing is, but at least that had some interesting twists and turns, and it had some more meat to the bones. Whereas this one feels like it's the idea, but it's not been fleshed out more than the basic idea of, right, they're inside a room, they have to keep surviving, we're going to keep introducing different killers. We're not really going to flesh out these killers, and we're also not going to make it so that they have to keep finding more clues as they go along. We're just kind of just going to let them go through it, and just by chance we're going to just throw out an ending that goes like, yeah, this explains everything, because we didn't really want to have to keep doing the Groundhog Day, a little bit more information as we go along. Yeah. We're just going to do, like, there's a different killer as you go along, and there's no mystery to solve here.
No, it was a very middling film.
Yeah, it was a kind of. To be fair, I had the thought that went into my head. To be fair, like when the film started, where it came up with Sony, and then they came up with their PlayStation thing. I was like, Sony, you make good games, but to be honest, I started thinking about films that Sony make, and I was like, you really don't make good films unless you have a director like Quentin Tarantino, or the two brothers, I can't remember what their name are, Chris Miller and something, that made like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, or you have the people at Disney technically making your Spider-Man films. Yeah. I can't think of any other Sony film where it's not been like, if they just try to make their own stuff, it's normally, most of their horror films are very middling. They've made other superhero films like freaking Craven and all that shite. You know what I mean? Like,
I forgot that Sony made films.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like,
it is.
I literally was trying to think, like, actually, Sony, what, to be honest, I'm surprised that you're still like going at it, because I swear your films are not making a ton of money.
Yeah,
and you're just throwing out dud after dud. You're literally trying to survive based on the money of Spider-Man. Yeah. Spider-Man is what's keeping them alive.
They're milking those teats.
The fact that I think they had the rights to James Bond for a little bit, to release that, so they stuck onto that for a while, But they mainly survive on like trying to hold on to some franchises that they got a long time ago.
Pretty much.
But they're films. But it just is. It's not a sign of like badge of honor when it's like Sony. If you play the game, you're like, oh yeah, this could be good. But if you watch it in film, it's like, this is probably going to be a watchable, possibly fun in parts, but it's not going to be like a standout film in any kind of range.
I mean, the slogan should just be Sony, I'd rather play the game.
Yeah, literally. Like,
I was watching all of in the opening where they have the Last of Us, they have Joel and Ellie, and then they've got Kratos and his boy, and then they've got Jin Sakai from Ghost of Tsushima. They've got all these kind of new and all of the cool characters they've brought in, and I was like, the games are very cinematic to the point that I'd rather not watch a film and just play the game.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, especially like The Last of Us 2 season has come out.
Yeah.
And they've made quite a few changes to some stuff. But I've heard that it's only really kind of like minor changes. Yeah. They've still kept the story. And it's just like, well, I want to just play the game, because the game's so good.
It can feel like that. Yeah, I mean, with that one, I think the first season kind of like it kept the same, but it did make enough changes that you were like, I can see it. Like, it had some good stuff. But I'm not so sure with the second how much they are the same. But then I think they're making like 4 seasons of it, so I don't know how long they go it, how much they're going to change. But it is those kind of things. It is hard, like I said right at the very start. It is a kind of like, how do you remake a video game without it being like you're basically just,
Yeah.
And this is why video games have been so hard to adapt. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like, I feel like it works okay with kid-based humor. So the only ones that actually have like kind of worked, and that's mainly because kids love them. That's why they made money.
Yeah.
And they're perfectly fine films. They're not amazing films, but they're okay films. Sonic films.
Yeah.
Super Mario Brothers film, the animated one they made.
Yeah.
They just made Minecraft, and a lot of people were like, that's not Minecraft, but they got won over by the fact that, it's just fucking bolts to the wall, just, and it's got Lava Chicken song. So,
I don't know what that is, but I just heard of it.
But those ones were, and Detective Pikachu, stuff like that.
Yeah,
those ones were successful, but that's mainly because, one, kids just were really drawn in by them, too. But if you look at a lot of the ones I've tried to adapt for adults, away from, Last of Us, TV, we've done that. TV ones, because some of them, if you've got the way to like let them breathe and stuff like that, they can be better. But on film, trying to condense down certain the games into when they keep saying they're going to make like a God of War film, it's like, but you're going to condense it down so much that it probably wouldn't be that good.
You're not going to have breathing space for it,
especially when you're probably going to end up being like, we're going to cast like Vin Diesel.
We're casting Vin Diesel as Kratos.
As Kratos, and that's going to
and Tom Holland as Atreus. You're like, okay.
Fuck's sake. What are you doing? But that's what I mean, like, but then you look at how many of them have been for the more adult content ones, and there've just been so many. But you got Uncharted, which people were okay with, but it still wasn't an good adaptation of the game. Borderlands was out the other year, and that was a train wreck of a thing. There's so many bad ones.
I was thinking, I watched like half of the Uncharted film when I went. I went to Anna's, when I went home with Anna a few months ago, and I watched it with her dad, and we stopped like halfway through. I can't remember why, just something. And then I said to him, Misha, do you want to like carry on the film? And he was just like, he said no. I just like went off. So I watched half of the Uncharted film, and I was like, this is just like.
It was very mild and dull, and basically felt like they were just trying to take the charm. They were basically just trying to be like, you're Spider-Man.
He was Spider-Man. And Mark Wahlberg.
Mark Wahlberg. You'll just be Mark Wahlberg.
You'll just be Mark Wahlberg.
Exactly, exactly as you are. And we're just going to say you're these characters, but really you're not these characters. And it just is, it is a really hard thing to do, because when you've played a character in that much depth and emotion, like, it's really hard, And so that's why with this film, for instance, I completely understand why he's trying to go away from it. But I guess it is that line between like, what point do people start being like, well, this is just a different kind of film now. You've taken it away from that thing, and I don't think it's necessarily the idea that he came up with. I think for me personally, it was Rip Dog. They did do Rip Dog, so that was it. No, I think personally it was more of the case of it was it just didn't try to include the depth that I think they could have had,
and the execution more than the idea.
You can't say that even they'll be like, but we're trying to make a small 90-minute kind of thing. But that still could easily, but a lot of depth, a lot of interesting character and stuff like that in that time. There's still a lot more that like could have been done to really instill it, and a lot more that could have been to a less disappointing kind of villainous ending. And, these kind of parts in this film that really just kind of, I thought, like, brought down the fun quality. And with a director, I said about, David F. Sandberg before, saying like, I remembered him from doing things, Lights Out, which was pretty well received horror film. Annabelle Creation, which again was actually a very well received, for a sequel to a film, and the thing is, and then he went on to do the Shazam films. And the interesting thing is what we both said is Annabelle Creation and Lights Out, I remember being because they're actually quite good characterization, and they're mainly about the characters with horror thrown into them. So there's horror elements within them, but most of it was about the story of characters and creating these characters and stuff like that. And even if I go to even his other superhero ones like Shazam, they were mainly all about character and comedy. And it's weird that this film is kind of lacking in like that kind of fun playfulness that he had with those or the more serious tone he had with his horror film. He's taken that more serious one, but weirdly it feels the characterization. I think it's Gary Dauberman who also, I think, wrote a lot of the Annabelle and stuff like that, and I think he wrote as well. He's and again it just felt it is lacking that fun that a video. If you're going to go for a video game, then you might as well go for fun.
Gary Dauberman.
You might as well go for that kind of fun, atmospheric feeling instead of going that. And it could have done with a bit more of that Happy Death Day kind of like
a bit more fun to
just
it. Just
throw it out to that. The bit when they all explode is a bit of fun, but it also was quite horrific as well. So it had a nice balance in those scenes. But I just didn't. It's the same way that I can't remember any of the characters' name. I can't remember. There's nothing that's going to stand out for me that I'm going to remember of this afterwards. And the fact that I was sat in the cinema and thinking, how cool would it be? They do those like cinema day where you can actually do gaming on the big screen. Awesome. And I was like, it would be awesome to spend an entire night in the cinema and play Until Dawn, the actual game. I was like, that would be an amazing experience, But seeing the film on the big screen is just Yeah,
it was okay. Yeah,
it's all right. If you want to go out on a little date night, if you want to go out just to see like a bit of a horror, it's got some good gore. It's got some, it's got some good effects. It's got some things that will be kind of like, if you've played the game, you'll be like, oh yeah, there's that little link and stuff like that. But it has also got things that will probably also annoy you a little bit if you have enjoyed the game.
Well, I mean, I guess that kind of sums it up,
I think that's it, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, come and let us, if you have seen Until Dawn, come and let us know your thoughts. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at CMTH Podcast. As always, please remember to hit that subscribe button. We've got some fun content planned for you as things start to warm up. We will
horror coming out,
baby. We will also be returning to our, summer slasher season, so that's something to look forward to. But if you want the episodes as soon as they come out, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave us a lovely review, and get it on until the break of dawn. And we will see you next week. Goodbye.